In 1956, a Turkish naval officer named Captain İlhan Durupınar was cataloging artifacts in the basement archives of the Topkapi Palace Museum in Istanbul when he found something that should not exist. A clay tablet, roughly 3,000 years old, covered in cuneiform script and geometric patterns. At first glance, it looked like dozens of other Sumerian astronomical charts scattered across museum collections worldwide. But when Durupınar traced the markings with his finger, following the lines and symbols from edge to center, he realized he was not looking at a star map. He was looking at Earth from above, as if someone had photographed it from space thousands of years before satellites existed. The map showed continental outlines that match modern geography with disturbing accuracy. The Mediterranean Basin, the Fertile Crescent, the Persian Gulf. But it was what appeared at the top of the tablet that made Durupınar's hands shake. A circular void at the northern edge of the world, marked with a symbol he had never seen before. Around this void, carved in archaic Sumerian script, so old that most scholars could not translate it, was a single repeated phrase. The gods sealed the gateway, let no flesh pass through until the appointed time. The Watchers remain. The punishment for entry is erasure from the fabric of being. Durupınar spent 3 weeks trying to authenticate the tablet before showing it to his superiors. By the time he did, someone had already removed it from the catalog. When he returned to retrieve it, the artifact was gone. No record of accession. No documentation of its existence. The only proof he had ever seen it was the detailed sketches he had made in his personal journal. Sketches that would not surface publicly for another 40 years. If you want to see more deep dives into ancient mysteries that mainstream archaeology refuses to touch, hit subscribe now. I cover suppressed artifacts, forbidden history, and archaeological anomalies that do not fit the accepted narrative every single week. To understand why this map matters, you need to understand what the North Pole actually is, not the magnetic North Pole, which shifts and wanders across the Arctic Ocean. The geographic North Pole, the axis point, the place where all lines of longitude converge into a single point, where the concept of east and west ceases to have meaning. Modern satellite imagery shows exactly what you would expect at the North Pole. Icy, miles of it. Shifting pack ice floating on the Arctic Ocean, moving with currents and wind, piling up in pressure ridges, fracturing into leads of open water. There is no land mass beneath the ice. Just 14,000 feet of freezing ocean sitting on top of the Lomonosov Ridge, an underwater mountain range that runs from Siberia to Greenland. But here's the problem. Every ancient map that depicts the North Pole shows something else. Not ice. A void. A hole. An opening into something below. The most famous example is the Gerardus Mercator map of 1595. Mercator, the cartographer who created the projection system we still use today, drew the Arctic as 4 massive land masses separated by channels of rushing water, all converging toward a central point. At that point, he drew a black magnetic mountain surrounded by a whirlpool. He labeled it Rups Nigra, the Black Rock. In his notes, Mercator claimed he was copying the geography from older charts he described as impossibly ancient, passed down through secret channels from sources he refused to name. What makes Mercator's map particularly disturbing is the level of detail. The 4 landmasses are not rough sketches. They have coastlines, rivers, and interior features drawn with precision that suggest direct observation. The channels between the landmasses are marked with directional arrows showing water flowing inward toward the central vortex. Mercator noted that sailors who ventured too far north reported their compasses spinning wildly, that the stars appeared wrong, and that some ships simply vanished without a trace. He also included measurements. The distance from the outer edge of the Arctic landmasses to the central void is 1,440 nautical miles. The diameter of the void itself is 90 miles. These are not estimates, they are surveyed measurements. But no explorer of Mercator's era had the technology to verify these numbers. The Arctic Ocean would not be properly charted until the 20th century. So where did Mercator get his data? His personal library, confiscated by the Catholic Church after his death and eventually dispersed across European collections, contained maps and texts that modern scholars cannot identify. Fragments of vellum with navigation notations in languages that do not match any known script. Star charts showing constellations from perspectives that are not visible from European latitudes. And references in Mercator's own handwriting to something he called the Inventio Fortunata, a lost travel account describing a voyage to the Arctic by an unnamed priest in the 1360s. The Inventio Fortunata has never been found. Multiple medieval scholars referenced it, describing it as an eyewitness account of the polar regions, complete with maps and detailed observations of the people who lived there. Not Inuit, not any known Arctic culture. The text supposedly described a civilization living at the North Pole, inside the Earth, accessible through the channels Mercator drew on his map. A civilization that possessed technology far beyond medieval Europe, that lit their realm with artificial suns, and that occasionally emerged to trade with surface dwellers before retreating back through the ice. The Orontius Phineus map of 1531 shows the same thing. A circular continent at the top of the world with rivers flowing inward toward a central void. The Boitier map of 1737 depicts Antarctica before the ice, with similar inward flowing waterways leading to a polar opening. Maps separated by centuries, created by cartographers who never met, all showing the same impossible feature: a hole at the pole. Mainstream scholars dismiss these maps as fantasy, medieval artistic license, cartographers filling in blank spaces with imagination because they had never actually been to the poles. The academic explanation is that ancient mapmakers heard travelers' tales about the midnight sun, about compasses spinning wildly near the magnetic pole, about strange atmospheric phenomena, and they interpreted these stories as evidence of a physical opening in the Earth. But the Sumerian tablet predates all of these maps by 2,000 years. And unlike the medieval cartographers who had no way to verify their sources, the Sumerians had something else. Direct testimony, recorded encounters, the Anunnaki. According to Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki were beings who came from the sky, who possessed knowledge of the stars, who taught humanity agriculture, mathematics, astronomy, and writing. Mainstream archaeology classifies them as gods, mythological figures invented to explain natural phenomena. But read the actual texts, the ones written in first person, describing specific events with specific dates and specific geographic locations, and the mythology excuse starts to fall apart. The word Anunnaki itself is revealing. It translates roughly to those who from heaven to earth came, not metaphorically descended, physically came, from somewhere else. The Sumerian texts make a clear distinction between the Anunnaki and the Igigi, the lesser gods who did the manual labor before humans were created. The Igigi eventually rebelled, refusing to continue digging canals and mining minerals, and that rebellion is what prompted Enki to create humanity as a replacement workforce. This is not the language of mythology, it is the language of historical record. The texts describe the Anunnaki as having specific physical characteristics. Taller than humans with pale skin that could not tolerate direct sunlight for extended periods, which is why they built underground dwelling places and only emerged at dawn or dusk. They had technology the Sumerians called Mies, divine powers, but the descriptions read like advanced tools. Devices that could move massive stones, instruments that could navigate by the stars, weapons that could level cities with fire and thunder. The Atrahasis epic, another Sumerian text, describes the creation of humans in even more explicit detail. Enki and the goddess Ninmah took clay, which scholars interpret as biological material, and mixed it with the blood of a slain god, which could represent genetic material from one of the Anunnaki. They shaped this mixture in a mold, 14 at a time, 7 male and 7 female. The gestation period was 10 months. The offspring were fertile and capable of reproducing on their own. This is genetic engineering, described in terms that a Bronze Age scribe could understand. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest written stories in human history, describes Gilgamesh's journey to meet Utnapishtim, the survivor of the Great Flood. To reach him, Gilgamesh had to travel through the Mashu Mountains, described as twin peaks that hold up the sky. He entered a tunnel through the mountain that led to a garden on the other side, a garden where the gods dwelled. The text describes this tunnel as descending deep into the earth before emerging into light again. Not sunlight, a different kind of light, described as cold and unchanging. The Sumerian king list, a text that records the reigns of kings before and after the flood, states that kingship first descended from heaven to the city of Eridu, not established by humans, descended, delivered from above. The list then names specific kings who ruled for impossibly long periods. Alulim ruled for 28,800 years. Alalgar ruled for 36,000 years. 8 kings ruled for a combined 241,200 years before the flood swept over the land. Mainstream historians claim these numbers are symbolic, that ancient cultures use different timescales, that the years represent months or seasons. But the mathematics does not support that interpretation. If you convert the years to months, the reigns become absurdly short. If you keep them as years, you are forced to confront the possibility that these were not human kings at all. They were something else, something that lived much longer than humans. The Anunnaki. The Sumerian creation myth, the Enuma Elish, describes how the god Enki created humanity by mixing the blood of a sacrificed god with clay. Not metaphorically. The text provides specific procedural details. The blood was mixed with clay in a specific ratio. The mixture was shaped in a mold. An incantation was spoken. The result was Adamu, the first man created to serve the gods as a worker, a biological entity engineered for a purpose. This is not mythology, it reads like a technical manual. And it is corroborated by genetic evidence that mainstream science cannot explain. Human chromosome is a fusion of 2 ancestral chromosomes, a mutation that occurred sometime in our evolutionary past. But the fusion is so precise, so clean, that it does not match any known natural process. It looks deliberate. And it happened roughly 200,000 years ago, the same time frame when Homo sapiens suddenly emerged with cognitive abilities far beyond our Neanderthal cousins. And the North Pole entrance, the Sumerians called it the Abziyu. The deep, the abyss, the place where Enki dwelled, far from the cities of men, in a realm beneath the surface. Not metaphorically beneath, literally, accessible through specific geographic locations marked on maps that should not exist. When Captain Darupinar's sketches finally surfaced in 1998, a researcher named Dr. Khalid Rahman obtained copies and attempted to decode the symbols surrounding the polar void. Rahman had spent 15 years studying Sumerian cuneiform, specifically the archaic dialectal variations used in pre-dynastic texts. The symbols on the tablet were not standard cuneiform. They were proto-cuneiform, a pictographic script that predated the wedge-shaped writing system most people associate with Mesopotamia. Proto-cuneiform emerged around 3400 BCE in the city of Uruk before the development of phonetic writing. Each symbol represented a complete concept rather than a sound, which meant translation required understanding the cultural and religious context in which the symbols were used. Many proto-cuneiform tablets describe administrative matters and inventories of grain and livestock, but some, particularly those found in temple complexes, describe cosmological events and divine interactions with a specificity that suggests eyewitness accounts. Rahman identified 17 distinct glyphs arranged in a spiral pattern around the void. The spiral itself was significant. Sumerian cosmology described reality as layered in spirals, with each layer representing a different plane of existence. The physical world occupied the outermost spiral. The realm of the gods, the Abzu, occupied the innermost. The spiral on the tablet suggested movement inward, a journey from surface reality towards something deeper and more fundamental. Translating them was nearly impossible because Proto-Cuneiform does not have a one-to-one correspondence with sounds. Each glyph represents a concept, and the meaning shifts depending on context and positioning. But Raman cross-referenced the symbols with similar glyphs found in Uruk, in Eridu, and in underwater sites in the Persian Gulf that had been submerged since the end of the last ice age, and he produced a working translation. The outer ring of glyphs. The sky people sealed this gate when the waters rose. The middle ring, those who pass through without permission will be unmade, not killed. Unmade. Erased from existence in a way that transcends physical death. The inner ring, closest to the void itself. The watchers remain at the threshold. They do not sleep. They do not forget. They wait for the appointed time when the seal will break and the sky people will return. Rahman submitted his translation to 3 peer-reviewed archaeology journals. All 3 were rejected without review. One editor wrote back personally, advising Rahman to pursue other research interests if he wanted to maintain his academic credibility. Rahman ignored the advice and published his findings independently. 6 months later, his university position was terminated for unspecified budget reasons. He has not published anything since. But Rahman's translation aligns perfectly with myths from cultures that had no contact with the Sumerians. The Inuit of northern Canada have stories about Kaumanek, the great light at the top of the world, a place where the sky opens and the spirits of the dead travel to another realm. They describe it as guarded by beings called the Tupilak, watchers created by shamans to protect the threshold. The Inuit will not travel to certain areas near the magnetic North Pole, even today. They claim compasses do not work there, that time moves differently, that people who go too far north sometimes return changed, speaking in languages no one understands, unable to remember their own names. Elders pass down warnings that have remained unchanged for generations. Norse mythology describes Asgard as accessible through Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge, which Odin and the Aesir used to travel between realms. Earlier versions of the myth, pre-Christian versions preserved in Icelandic sagas, describe Bifrost not as a bridge in the sky, but as a passage through the ice, located at the northern edge of Midgard. The Aesir were not gods living in clouds. They were beings who came from below, from a realm accessed through the frozen north. Tibetan Buddhism teaches about Shambhala, the hidden kingdom, accessible only to those with pure hearts and specific knowledge. Early texts describe Shambhala as located beneath the surface of the earth, reachable through caves in the Himalayas or through openings at the poles. The Kalachakra Tantra, written in the 10th century, provides detailed geographic instructions for reaching Shambhala, including specific landmarks, mountain passes, and a final descent through a tunnel of ice that leads to an inner realm lit by a sun that never sets. These are not independent mythologies. They describe the same thing from different cultural perspectives. A physical location at the North Pole, an entrance into something below, and warnings, consistent across every tradition, that entering without permission results in something worse than death. Modern polar exploration provides strange corroboration. In 1947, Rear Admiral Richard Byrd led Operation High Jump, the largest Antarctic expedition in history. Officially, the mission was to establish research bases and test equipment in extreme cold. Unofficially, documents declassified in 2004 reveal that Byrd was searching for something. The mission included 4,700 personnel, 13 ships, and multiple aircraft. For a research expedition, the military presence was excessive. Destroyers, an aircraft carrier, and Marines equipped for combat. The timing is also suspicious. Operation High Jump launched less than 2 years after World War II ended, at a time when military resources were stretched thin and budgets were being slashed. Yet the Navy allocated massive funding and personnel to an Antarctic expedition. Why? Some researchers point to rumors that Nazi Germany had established a secret base in Antarctica during the war, a facility called New Swabia, where they continued advanced weapons research. But German documents captured after the war make no mention of such a base, and no physical evidence has ever been found. Another theory suggests Byrd was searching for entrances to the inner Earth, based on German expeditions in the 1930s that supposedly discovered cave systems beneath the ice extending for hundreds of miles. German occultists, particularly those in the Thule Society and Vril Society, believed in a hollow Earth inhabited by an advanced Aryan race, and they allegedly sent expeditions to both poles to find entrances to this inner realm. The idea of an inner, hollow world captured imaginations. Byrd's expedition lasted only 8 weeks instead of the planned 6 months. They left Antarctica abruptly in February 1948. Official reports claimed they accomplished their research objectives ahead of schedule. But Byrd's personal diary, published by his family after his death, tells a different story. According to the diary, Byrd flew over the South Pole and continued north, expecting to see more ice. Instead, he saw land, green land, with rivers, vegetation, and animals that looked like mastodons. He flew for 3 hours over this impossible landscape before his plane was intercepted by disc-shaped craft that forced him to land. Beings emerged from the craft, tall and pale, with blonde hair, speaking perfect English. They gave Byrd a message. Humanity had entered the atomic age, and the surface world was headed for destruction. The beings, whom Byrd called the Masters, had tried to make contact during the war, but their emissaries were attacked. They were withdrawing further into their realm, but they would emerge again when the surface world destroyed itself, to reclaim the Earth and rebuild. Mainstream historians dismiss Byrd's diary as a hoax, written by conspiracy theorists after his death. But the flight logs from Operation High Jump, available through the National Archives, show unexplained gaps. Hours of flight time with no corresponding mission reports, radio communications that were classified and remain classified, and statements Byrd made in a Chilean press conference in March 1948, where he warned that America needed to prepare for the possibility of an invasion by aircraft that could fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds. The North Pole has its own mysteries. In 1968, the USS Nautilus became the first submarine to reach the North Pole by traveling beneath the ice. The mission was classified, and the official report describes routine navigation and scientific data collection. But crew members who were aboard, interviewed decades later, describe something else. Sonar readings showed structures on the ocean floor that did not match natural geology. Perfect right angles. Symmetrical formations. And at one point, sonar detected a massive void directly beneath the pole, a cavern or chamber that extended down for miles beyond the range of their equipment. The Nautilus did not investigate. They surfaced at the pole, took readings, and left. When crew members asked about the sonar anomalies, they were told the equipment had malfunctioned. The data was classified. Personnel were reminded of their security clearances and the consequences of discussing classified information. In 2001, a Russian expedition drilling ice cores at the North Pole reported finding air pockets in the ice-containing atmosphere that did not match the surrounding environment. Higher oxygen content. Trace gases that suggested volcanic activity, but there are no volcanoes within 1,000 miles of the drill site. The samples were sent to laboratories in Moscow for analysis. The results were never published. When journalists followed up, they were told the samples were contaminated and discarded. Google Earth coverage of the poles is famously incomplete. The North Pole appears as a blurred smudge, a digital artifact where the satellite images do not quite line up. Google says this is because polar orbits make it difficult to image the exact pole. But independent researchers have demonstrated that the blur extends far beyond what orbital mechanics would require. It covers an area roughly 300 miles in diameter, centered perfectly on the geographic North Pole. And the blur is not consistent. Different satellite passes show different features, as if the imagery is being actively edited rather than simply incomplete. In 2018, a climate research team flying over the Arctic reported seeing a perfect circular opening in the ice, roughly 2 miles in diameter, with mist rising from the center. They photographed it and submitted the images to their funding agency along with their research data. The agency confirmed receiving the photos, but requested the team not discuss the anomaly publicly until it could be verified. 6 months later, the agency announced that the opening was a natural polynya, an area of open water surrounded by ice caused by unusual current patterns. The original photographs were not released. The team's subsequent funding applications were all rejected. What is actually at the North Pole? The official answer is ice and water, nothing more. But the evidence, spread across 5,000 years of human history, suggests something else. A gateway, an entrance, a threshold between the surface world and something below. The Sumerian map does not just mark the entrance, it marks the warning. That warning has been repeated in different languages and different cultures with remarkable consistency. Do not enter. The watchers remain. The penalty is erasure. The appointed time. That phrase appears in Sumerian texts, in Tibetan teachings, in Norse prophecy. A specific moment when the seal will break, when the gates will open, when those who dwell below will emerge. Some traditions describe it as the end of an age, a cyclic event that has happened before and will happen again. The Sumerian long count calendar tracks cycles of 3,600 years called sars. One sar equals the orbital period of Nibiru, the planet of the Anunnaki, according to translations by Zecharia Sitchin. Mainstream academics rejected Sitchin's work, but his timeline aligns with global catastrophe records. The Younger Dryas impact event occurred roughly 12,800 years ago. The flooding of the Black Sea Basin occurred roughly 7,600 years ago. The Bronze Age collapse occurred roughly 3,200 years ago. Each was separated by intervals that match multiples of the SAR cycle. If the cycle holds, the next event is coming soon. And if the warnings carved around the North Pole entrance are real, if the watchers are still there, guarding the threshold after all these millennia, then when the seal breaks and the appointed time arrives, humanity will finally learn what our ancestors were trying to tell us. That we were never alone. That the beings who shaped our species, who taught us language and agriculture and mathematics, they did not leave Earth behind. They retreated. They sealed themselves away, deep below the ice, waiting for the moment when the surface world would either destroy itself or evolve enough to rejoin them. The Sumerian map is not just a map. It is a marker and a warning to future generations that some doors should remain closed until we are ready for what is on the other side. And the question we have to ask ourselves now is whether we are ready. Because ready or not, the appointed time is coming closer. The ice is melting faster than predicted. The magnetic poles are shifting at accelerating rates that scientists cannot fully explain. And the watchers, if they are real, if they have been standing guard at the threshold for millennia, they are not waiting much longer. Maybe that is the most shocking thing the Sumerians left us. Not proof of ancient astronauts or hollow earth or hidden civilizations, but a deadline. A warning that time is running out, that the seal will not hold forever, and when it breaks, the world will change in ways we cannot imagine or prepare for. And maybe that is why the tablet disappeared from the Topkapi Palace archives without a trace. Why Ilhan Darupinar's discovery was erased from official records. Why every attempt to investigate the polar anomalies gets shut down or classified. Because some people already know the truth. They have known for a very long time. And they have decided that humanity is not ready.